So this might come off as a stupid question, but regardless, uh, what do you think is a good diet, or where do you think is like the optimal diet lies?
No, man, this is a perfectly like wanted to speak about that actually because I've really like solidified my understanding on that a lot in the last couple of months. So the most evidence-based diet in terms of actual outcomes, when I say actual outcomes, I mean like there's probably no diet which has like multiple randomized control trials. I'm not even saying observational studies, but multiple randomized control trials, not just short term, but even lasting like 1 to 6 years in duration, showing improvements. And that's the Mediterranean diet, hands down. Like that's the only diet for which we even have meta-analysis of randomized control trials for cardiovascular disease specifically. So that's the kind of dietary pattern that I recommend like anyone who comes to work with me, or even in like my public facing content. Like that's something I will recommend. There's a lot of ifs and buts. Like people take that assuming that okay, I can just do this, and if it doesn't work for me, then like Johan's wrong about like what he said or the science is wrong. It doesn't work that way. Like we all have individual differences. Some of us may have like IBS or some kind of gut disorder, and we might not be like able to do well with that level of fiber in the diet, or like someone might have some like rare condition which some foods might be contraindicated, or they might have some food sensitivities to like certain foods in those diet, but then they like implement everything and they don't feel so good, so they tend to like demonize the diet as a whole rather than thinking that okay, there might be like one or two things within that. Like I'll give you my own example. You all saw like I was reacting to coconut and dairy, so now on that basis if I just like demonize the carnivore diet or even like the vegan diet for having coconut, I'd not be like really being intellectually honest, because it was only that food like within that which was like triggering my symptoms to that extent, but everything else was fine. But I'm not going to know that until I sit and like isolate variables and like try to find out like which one was doing the problem. So that's just like a broad way to think about this. Like there are certain dietary patterns which we see consistently in long term like cohort studies and even in randomized control trials that are beneficial. It doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. That's a template that we want most people to come in for wide variety of reasons. I can go within the individual foods within these diets also and tell you like why I the biochemical or mechanistic basis through which they're exerting their effects. Whether you look at like fruit and vegetable consumption, whole grain consumption, like seafood, some good quality dairy options like yogurt and stuff. Like all of these foods are associated with positive outcomes. Like even fermented food, individual food groups, like if you take fruits, if you take vegetables, if you take whole grains, if you take like nuts, seeds, if you take seafood consumption, like fermented food, like you'll find interventional trials on all of these, even like omega-6, rich foods and stuff. Like you'll find actual interventional trials looking at changes in biomarkers and like some changes in like some long-term risks, where we see like individually these foods like like lower inflammation, or they like improve insulin sensitivity and they help with weight loss or like something. So if you look at it, depends on how deep you want to go. If you want to like go individually into each of these foods, we can just have like a 5 hour long conversation on that itself. But overall, as a dietary pattern, that's what I recommend overall. And then there are always exceptions. Like someone might have issues with histamine, so then they like have to kind of there are many foods within that diet which would be like high in histamine. If someone has issues with oxalate toxicity, or they have like kidney stone risk formation, then like we might have to restrict like high oxalate foods a bit. But then even within that, there are a lot of nuances. Like most like the entire like keto carnivore side of things, they've just like made this whole culture out of demonizing like plant anti-nutrients. So a lot of them they're not really as problematic as we think, or they're problematic for certain subgroups, and there are various factors which also affect them which aren't diet related. Like we can take oxalates as an example. So oxalates are like one plant like anti-nutrient found in certain foods in high amounts, like spinach, dark chocolates, things, sweet potatoes, things like that. So it's not just the dietary oxalate content that's impacting like your urinary oxalate excretion, which is like the best kind of way to assess oxalate. Like a 24-hour urine oxalate test is the one that's used in the studies looking at like oxalate and its impacts. So there's also like the amount of calcium you're having with every meal. So if you're having like calcium along with that, we also have certain gut bacteria which digest oxalate, like oxalobacter formogenesis. So if you don't have that in your gut, also then like your oxalate formation will be high. If you're having high amounts of vitamin C, if you have a B6 deficiency and you're having collagen, there's like everything gets that granular. If you like just zoom into it, like you'll find different things which affect that particular thing you're concerned about, which don't have much to do with the food that you're so scared about to begin with. Same thing with like phytates and like tannins and stuff. They are also demonized for like being plant anti-nutrients. But with this whole conversation, I've seen that most of the influencers are focused on the deficiencies, and they don't seem to have like much of an idea about like the toxicity side of things. Because I see this in my practice all the time, like people eating heavy animal based diets and like not like having balanced diets overall. They'll come in with iron overload, they'll come in with like zinc toxicity, selenium toxicity, and it won't be picked up in conventional reference ranges, right? Like selenium, for example, if we take, it's thought to be like a really like a wonder supplement and like a mineral also that way. And people think that it's really good, like even there's no like upper threshold for that. But we see clearly in the studies like going above 150 is shown to increase like diabetes incidence and stuff, like regardless, like multiple studies like aligning with that. So I see this all the time that like people will come in. Iron overload is like a very very nasty thing, because it like by itself it can cause low testosterone, it can screw up your thyroid, it can screw up your liver, it can cause like high inflammation, insulin resistance, like all the things we are scared about. And we try to like a lot of people try to eat animal foods for, they can induce an iron overload kind of situation and land up with all of those things like which don't have anything to do with the food. It's just because like the iron is accumulating, and then like hemochromatosis kind of presentation will impact, because iron itself damages different organs, like it damages the pancreas, it damages like the pituitary, it damages like different things through which like these impacts land up coming that way. So yeah, I don't even see like prudent basis for demonizing certain food groups, like even phytates and tannins and all. They have their place, like they help to like reduce the absorption of some of these things, which can be bad for someone who's like doesn't have a good quality diet or something, but it can be protective for someone who has like overload. So it's all about knowing like the functions and the utility that each food group provides, and then accordingly being able to use that in a clinical setting to improve outcomes that way. Yeah, so those are just like my, there's always nuances to like diet and individual application and stuff, but broadly I want people to come in that kind of pattern, because that's the best that we know for long term health outcomes. You might do a diet in the short run and you might feel great, but it doesn't really like comment on the long term impacts. Like you can smoke and you can like see you'll have some weight loss if you start smoking, and you might feel good energetically because the nicotine, it doesn't really mean like it's the best for long term health outcomes. So I see diets in a similar way. Like someone can get on a certain diet which is very restrictive and eliminates a lot of food groups, and they feel better, but that it's not going to translate into like better long term health outcomes. Yeah, that's how I see it.